Well, hello my YouTube lovelies, and welcome to this episode 13, Finishing Touches. This is going to be a long one, having just gone through all of the footage. There's me in my head thinking, oh yeah, it's only covering a few bits and pieces, but oh my god, there was quite a lot. So I'll rifle through this as quick as I possibly can, and hopefully we'll keep your attention throughout the whole thing. If you're new to this channel, it'd be lovely to have you subscribe and give us a thumbs up or a thumbs down, whatever floats your boat, but it'd be lovely to have you on board. So let's crack on, shall we? Finishing touches. So everything that you've seen thus far, you've seen all of the furniture being built, the ceiling put in, all of the main infrastructure in terms of heating, skylight, solar, the battery, leisure battery, etc. And now this is just the little loose ends, basically, to just sort of tidy the van up and kind of, I guess, give it that last little push that makes it from, I don't know, a 75-80% finished van to an almost 90-95% finished van. So we covered this very briefly when I talked about the bulkhead, but part of the finishing touches was actually doing this pelmet that's above my head. I call it like a pelmet, and I had to wait. So there was a time when I'd done the bulkhead, it was just left as a sort of the door and the door to get to the cupboard, and it was like that for ages. And I couldn't really do anything in terms of the finishing touches until the ceiling had gone in. So once the ceiling had gone in, which was last week's episode, I was able to then basically put the pelmet on. So the pelmet was just a sort of almost like a facade to just give it that nice sort of finished touch, something slightly quirky to look at. But it kind of just sort of made a few of the edges that looked a bit square and a little bit normal, just made it look a little bit more interesting, basically. So that was the idea with the pelmet, and again with the whole motif put in there. So that's sort of stuck on, but that's covered a little bit in the bulk of the problem episode. But it was done sort of later on in this finishing touch stage of the van, let's say. Once I've done the bulkhead pelmet, I then concentrate on the bedroom end, and the idea is you do the pelmet, you then finish with the bedroom, and then that basically seals both ends of the van. I've got the front of the van sealed and then the back of the van sealed, and then once those two bits are done, then that allows me to then concentrate on doing the light boxes, which we'll cover later in this episode. So doing the finishing touches around the back of the bed, again it was just finishing the top of where the wall and the door was to the back of the van, and that's just done with a small piece of MDF that's just sort of cut and curved to sort of go into the corner where the curvature of the van is, where the ceiling and the sort of wall meet. That piece is cut out of MDF ply, and then it's covered with I think it's 9mm. It's a 9mm ply, which I come up with this sort of rudimentary shape, just a curve. There's curves everywhere in the van, you know, the whole motif curves. The curves, it's just the sort of style that I like to use a lot in designs that I do, etc. But more than anything, it's just very tactile. It just sort of means that there are no corners anywhere and places that you're going to catch yourself and stuff like that. So that was kind of the idea of the curve. So I came up with this just sort of idea of just putting a curve that would go down into the wall. So the back piece is done first, and then I concentrate on the piece that is the sort of adjoining wall with the cupboard and the tool shed. And again, that's a slightly bigger piece with this curve cut through it, the whole motif drilled in at various points, and I think I screw the MDF to the timber of the wall in the back wall of the door, and then I can't remember if I glued it or not. Can't remember now. Don't know if I did. I think I just went straight on with nails and just nailed it in with the nail gun. And that basically again is like a sort of a pelmet header piece, just to sort of finish off the corner of the bed and everything, and it looks really nice, even if I do say so myself. So that's the bedroom done. Once I've done that, I then looked at doing the step. The step is just one of those places where, to be honest with you, I didn't really want to do anything with it. I was going to leave it as is, but there was always that sort of unfinished edge where you've got the layers of insulation and ply and all of the bits and pieces for the flooring, and that just had the metal barrier tape, the sort of vapor barrier tape that was just stuck there just to sort of tidy it all up, but it did look untidy. So in the end I came up with this idea of doing a step, and why not continue the whole theme. So that was just a matter of cutting out some pieces of 5mm, I think this was, cutting it to the right sort of depth of the step. Lots of jiggery pokery, lots of measuring, looking at it. I mean, Rob's van book is just full of drawings, but a lot of it was just having the book there and measuring with the tape, and then just sort of like drawing little sketches as I went along and taking measurements as I went along and putting all of those in the book here. So it's basically essentially making 3 pieces of wood, and because I wanted to do the whole motif, I didn't want to look through the hole to then see the metal tape behind, or the sort of vapor barrier tape, or the plastic step. So I then put some MDF, so I cut pieces of MDF roughly the same sort of size, cut the holes out of the fascia pieces, and then they're stuck onto the MDF pieces that sit behind it. I found the piece for the step, which I think, if I remember right, it was just a random offcut that I found in the workshop, and it was really chunky. It might have even been, it was chunkier than 18mm. So I don't know if there's such a thing. That maybe it was, I might have been like 20mm or 22mm or something. It was quite thick, and so I was able to use this small offcut that was there, and basically cut the angle of the step, work that out, and then once I'd got that gave me a nice sort of chunky surface on sort of 3 edges, in which I could then butt the fascia up to it and screw into the back of it, and so that now becomes one sort of solid piece that's sort of fairly structural, and then that step then goes on. So the step, the actual wooden piece that was cut, I think I covered that with some, I think it was some exhibition carpet that we had left over from some corporate gig, and it's just like a black charcoal carpet, very indiscreet carpet, so that's sort of cut and glued to the step, and then the fascia is then sort of screwed to the back of it. Then the step goes into the step itself, and then to sort of finish off the top edges I then use some sort of metal angle, sort of that 90-degree stuff, and just cut that and screw that into the floor. When you look at it in person, it's not the most tidiest of jobs, and it doesn't really bother me that much because, you know, it gets that much use in and out every single day. But yeah, when you look at it closely, it's not the best of things. As with a lot of things in the van, to tell you the truth, you know, it might look nice on camera, but you know, when you see it up close, yeah, it makes me cringe in places. But you know, it's okay, and it does sort of give it that nice sort of finishing touch. You know, as you as you come into the van, it does sort of, yeah, it kind of ties in with the whole theme of the van, so it's nice to have that as sort of a welcoming thing that you see as you come in. The next thing I do is the table. The table I thought long and hard about. I was wanting to get one of these Lagan legs, and I was, you know, I was humming and hawing about whether to spend that kind of money on it. And then when I looked at it as well, as much as they're really, really good, I do like them, and the way they adjust, etc., etc. But there was something about the leg, and looking at it, it just wouldn't work for the way I would have wanted it to work in terms of this particular corner here. I don't know why. I mean, perhaps had I bought one, I would have been able to have made it work. But when you look at videos, etc., and look at the way it turned and the way it twisted, something in my head told me that it wasn't going to work for me. And I also thought as well that it would detract a lot from what I'd done thus far in terms of everything's all being nice and timber, and it just would have looked a little bit out of place. So I came up with this idea of a table that would come out on the drawer unit. So again, get myself a nice drawer unit, big chunky sliding drawer unit, find a piece of 3x1 which is screwed to that, and that 3x1 piece of timber is the basically the platform which is hinged to the tabletop that sits onto that piece of wood. So the 3x1 is all measured and cut and screwed to the drawer unit. The drawer unit is then screwed to the kitchen cupboard, and what I do is I put a piece of 3x1 on the inside of the kitchen cupboard, because we're only going into, I think it's 9mm here, so the piece of timber at the back is just sort of enough to sort of sink the screws into, because it's not a lot of weight, but there's enough weight, so I needed something fairly substantial to take a good few screws in there. That's screwed in. The tabletop is just a piece of pine board. It's the same pine board that I used to do the kitchen surface. So I cut that to size. Now I would have liked it wider, and seeing it now sat at this end of the table, etc., it could have done with being a little bit wider, but if I had have made it wider, the way it sort of sits in this position here against the wall, it sticks out from the edge of the kitchen unit anyway, and so it would have stuck out a lot more had I made it the width that I really wanted. So I was trying to sort of make it so it would fit within the footprint as much as possible on the end of the sort of dresser kitchen cupboard area. So, but it works fine, it's okay. And obviously I've got my adjustable seats on the front of the sofa anyway, so if I did want to come in much closer, I can bring the seats in. So the pine board is cut, and I cut off all the corners with some nice rounded corners, just again nice and tactile, no corners for me to catch the crown jewels on, because it's pretty much that sort of height, I think. Again, use the whole motif in the corners just for a bit of interest, and then that's then screwed to the piece of wood that's on the drawer runner, that's secured with 3 hinges, I seem to remember. And then when it goes down into the sort of down position, or the table position, I used I think it was like a cabin hook at the other end to hook it onto the kitchen front, but it didn't work very well, so I used the cabin hook up here at the top, so when it's stored away that hooks it out the way, and then I use a pin hinge, one of my classic little pin hinges on the front there, and that just slides in, and that's what keeps the table from sort of falling down at that end. It's pretty sturdy. I mean, you can't put too much weight on the other end, but you can certainly put quite a decent amount of weight on at this end, because you've got the drawer runner and everything like that, so it's not too bad. That's it for the table, I think. Yeah. So then the next thing is the light boxes. The light boxes, again, because I've now finished doing the pelmet sort of header piece behind me on the bulkhead, and have done the sort of pelmet corner piece to the bedroom area, I've now got a front and the back, which gives me a defined sort of length to now work to. I always had this idea of how the lighting was going to work in terms of the sort of the light box idea. I had sort of faith that it was always going to work well for me, and it would be a really good way to be able to finish between the ceiling and the wall, so that area was always left uncovered for quite a while. And so what I did was I cut some strips of I think that's 5.5mm, if I remember right, and cut the strips into the sort of the depths or the widths that I needed, and I then worked out the sort of angle, so by putting it up against the ceiling and against the wall, knowing that I wanted to come away from the wall ever so slightly, because I wanted to run obviously lights on the inside and lights underneath it. So I sort of guesstimate how much from the wall I want to come, and once I've sorted out that angle, then what I do is I get pieces of MDF and I cut those into strips. I think I used the bandsaw to start with, but that was just a bit of a nuisance. So in the end what I did was I worked out what the angle was, and then cut the angle with a we call it a DeVault, but it's basically a circular saw, but it runs on a sort of a track. So you lay a track down and then the saw sort of runs on that track, and I was able to then sort of get the angle. I'm not quite sure what the angle is. It's something like a 30-degree angle or something like that, maybe less, I'm not quite sure, maybe 30, yeah. So cut that angle and then get that piece, stuck it on the wall panel saw, and then cut that into the strips. So it comes out from the wall by maybe 5-7 centimeters, something like that, so not a huge amount, but enough to just give us some clearance from the wall and to give me enough to run all the LEDs in. So that's cut, and then the MDF pieces are literally screwed into the wall, the timber that's at the top there where the wall meets the Reflectix, that's just screwed in. And then the fascia, once I've cut all of the holes out, working out where they need to be, etc, etc, all of those holes are cut out and then they're sanded, etc, and then I just nailed it on. Now I made a mistake I think when I did this, because in my head I figured, because I wanted to put the LED strip in, I figured it was going to be easier to cut the pieces into sort of, I don't know, I think I cut them at like 500s or something like that, or 700, I can't remember now, and was just going to make these sections which I could then be able to get my hand in and run the LED, etc, and then put another section in and another section. So I started to do it like that first of all, but as the sections got joined, it just looked like a bag of shit. It was awful. And the reason why is because obviously the ceiling sort of does that ever so slightly, and and with, even though the depths or the widths of the board are all the same, it just looked wrong. So in the end I took them off and I just opted down the right hand side of the van, or the left hand side as I'm looking at the back of the van here. I just cut it into 2 sections, so I think they're like 2 meter sections, and you can still see a bit of a light leak over the top, but it's not so bad, and you don't have the gap where the joins were going to butt up at every sort of 500 or 700. So I think it looks a little bit neater. So yeah, I just cut those into 2 meter strips, cut all the holes out, sanded it back, and then basically nailed it in. So again, there are no screws at all, no visible screws in this van. I mean, there are, and I know where they are, and if you ever see it, you can look around. I can see 2 here, actually I can see 7 here around me, but on the whole there's very, very few screw heads. You can't see many screw heads at all, so that's all nailed in. And then the LED I ran in at a later date, and that will be in the next episode anyway. So the right hand side, as I look back at the van, is done in 3 sections, and the reason why is because the kitchen, the way that sits up against the wall, it meant that one of the pieces I had to sort of cut down a little bit narrower in terms of its depth. So this has actually got 3 sections, and it does look a bit messy around the door just because of how the ceiling goes. I think the ceiling goes up ever so slightly. So there are many imperfections in this van. You know, it's not the most perfect van in the world, that's for sure. But yeah, I think that's done in 3 sections, and it looks a little bit messier this side. This side over here looks a lot neater, but then that's nice because that's the bit that you see as you come into the van. You see this bit, and it's the most prominent feature of the van as you come in. And that's it for the light boxes. I will tell you where they came from. I said ages ago, didn't I? Once upon a time, I will tell you where the inspiration for the holes came from. So it first started with, that's a bit unfortunate, isn't it? Hold on. Right, you're still there. I'm not a fucking amateur. I really am sometimes. Okay, inspiration for the hole motif in the van. So it started with, do I put handles on doors, etc. And the thinking was, handles as nice as they are and as funky as they can be, and all the sorts of ideas that you can do, it was always going to be something that I was going to catch myself on. I just knew it. So I just thought, well, just drill a hole, stick your finger in, madam, and pull, and everything will be fine. So the whole idea really originated from that. However, then it continuing into the rest of the van, it basically came out of, and I suppose it was sort of enforced with a trip that I took a couple of years ago with my children, and we went to Singapore, to the island of Sentosa, and we stayed in this hotel called, I think it was called the Village Hotel Sentosa. It was a brand new hotel, and we had this suite, so like the 2 rooms joined, and they had these sort of sliding walls, and which would sort of like divide the bedroom area and the bathroom and the area where the sink was going to the front door, etc. And it was full of all of these holes, and the holes then had a backing of timber behind it, and then some of the holes had nothing behind it, so you could actually see through it. So that was kind of, I remember taking a picture with my phone and that kind of enforced and sort of I guess what's the word, kind of confirmed, I guess, the idea of the holes, and just made it sort of something that, you know, was going to look really, really nice, having seen it in this hotel. So that's where it comes from. I'll put the pictures in the video so that you can see what I'm talking about as much as. And what's quite serendipitous in a bizarre way was that I remember that trip there. We flew into Singapore from Kuala Lumpur, and we got to Singapore, and I remember getting the tickets for the transit and everything, and us traipsing across, having to make God knows how many changes. I think it was like 3 or 4 changes on the underground, etc., to get onto the monorail to get you across to Sentosa Island. It was friggin' hot, and the kids were stressed, I was stressed, because we'd been travelling for quite a bit. And I remember when we got to the hotel, I realised that I'd left my bag with my laptop and my hard drives on the monorail. So in a bizarre way, it's funny how that all ties in with that hotel, the theme of that hotel, and my van, and the fact that that hotel and the staff in that hotel and the lady behind the reception, she basically phoned up the monorail people, and they found my bag, thank God, and then she walked with me to the station, chatted to a guy, and I got my bag back, which is great in a way, because without that, none of this footage, all of the videos that you've seen to date, although the finishing touches stuff came after that trip, I think. Yeah, I think so. Or maybe not. Oh God, I can't remember. It's so long ago now. But a lot of what you've seen today on all of these build episodes would have been lost had I not found that bag, because both my hard drives are in there as well as my laptop and camera. Everything was all in that bag. So nice little segue, eh? So that's where the inspiration came from. The Village Hotel, Sentosa, Singapore. All right. Last finishing touches. The last finishing touches were the wheels. The hubs were rubbish that you get with an Iveco. They look really crap, so I took those off. I was missing one anyway, so I took those off. I scrubbed away with a wire brush, some cleaning solution, cleaned as much of the rust away as possible. I think I even got like a disc on a drill and just sort of scrubbed away at it. Got all the surface rust off, cleaned it away, then I sprayed it with a primer, and then once I'd done the primer, let that dry, I then sprayed it with the matte black. So really, really simple. I think probably every Vanlife's wheel hubs are black, aren't they? I think it's just a trend. Yeah, and then at a later date I then found the wheel nut indicators, and those red ones, which kind of give it a nice little finishing touch, so I stuck those on, and that was done in the first lockdown. And during the first lockdown, just to sort of finish off and make the van look a little bit more sort of presentable, was to basically buff up the trim. The Iveco Daily's sort of notorious for the black plastic trim to actually be grey, even though it should be black, and it just looks awful. And a chat with Luke from Luke's Vanlife, he gave me this tip about using cherry blossom shoe polish, the black stuff, and he lent me some. He had a sort of a bottle that was left over, and I then bought a few more bottles, and then basically spent however many days, I think it was a day or 2 days over the first lockdown, and then basically shoe polished the grey trim to make it look black. And it really did sort of was the absolute finishing touch in terms of the way the van looks. It looks really, really good. I mean, everywhere else the bodywork the white paint, etc. is, yeah, let's not talk about that, shall we? Really, it does need a spray. But then again, I suppose that's all part of the fact that, you know, the van is not the most presentable looking van. It looks lovely on the inside, but from the outside you would not have a clue what's going on inside. And I guess that's the whole point. It's meant to look stealth, it's meant to look a bit sort of rough and ready, a bit like a delivery van. So there you go. Is that it? I think it is. Christ, this is a long video. Apologies. The next episode is Light Up My World, and it is the last episode, number 14. It's the last episode of the build. There will be a season 3. I'll talk about that in the next episode. So I hope you've enjoyed this one, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Cheers.